Hey y'all! Well, I want to go into a little more detail on where we're at on this EL34 12AX7 production amp. And I've mocked up a prototype. This is what it's going to look like. Gonna have Hammond transformers. Gonna likely have either EDCore or musical power supply output transformers. I haven't decided which. Still need to do some audition testing. I also need to figure out exactly what transformers are going to work best. It's going to be maybe not exactly like the 6SQ7 design. It's probably going to be geared more towards having a little bit cleaner sound. But again, that may change after I do some listening testing, and I may just decide, hey, this thing sounds better, you know, making 4 watts instead of 6 watts and having a little more THD because it's just got a nice warm tube sound. And so still got to do some testing and kind of figuring out all of that, exactly where I want this amp to go. Probably going to be some feedback from you guys. What you think? Maybe leave in the comments below. Would you rather see a amp like this limited to like 4 watts that has a warmer sound, or try to get like 6 watts and have a cleaner sound with a little less THD? And that could be from output transformer tuning plus a little bit of circuit, stuff. The other thing I've got to figure out too is how I want to implement the whole triode ultralinear switch, because I think that would be a popular thing, and it would be a way of reducing the power output to get the amp working in its sweet spot if you've got higher efficiency speakers, and have a sound that would work good for both lower efficiency and higher efficiency speakers. Kind of more of a wide ranging product. So anyway, on the layout, we've got my typical power supply is all over on one side of the amp, so that we don't have the high voltage AC or the high current AC anywhere near the signal path. Got the choke in the front. We got the rectifier tube here right behind the choke, right here. As you can see, we've got my cool little trim rings on the tubes. We're going to definitely be using those. Maybe building some with silver rings. The first batch is all going to have this gold trim, because I've got somehow ended up with a bunch of these gold trim rings, so I want to go ahead and use those up. As you can see too, when I flash the side, we're going to have the RCA jacks on the side like this by default. And by default, they're going to be sold as a power amp just like this with no volume control. And we're probably going to put the little skunky badge like down here like this, where the volume control would normally be. But for an upgrade price of probably going to be about 60 bucks, I can put a volume control here and move the little name tag here to the center. More like that. So I have a little same color as this trim volume knob, plus the thing moved over here to the center. So that's going to be kind of the aesthetics of it. Also, I'm going to be building this first batch of 5 by hand. I've decided that, at least to start out with, it's not worth me going out and sourcing some fab shop to make 5 of these when I don't even know how well they're going to sell. And so, if you're just insistent that you hate the RCA jacks on the back, I'll show you the back of the amp. There is space here to put a couple of RCA jacks vertically, right here. And I'm going to be using single tap output transformers. From talking with Thermomagnetic Labs and some other transformer folks, I'm learning that having multi-tap outputs are not ideal. And whenever you've got like windings past a tap, it can cause weird capacitance issues that can harm the frequency response of the amplifier. And so I want to make sure these things are as high performance as possible. So they're going to come with 8 ohm taps, somebody really wants one with 4 ohms, I could special order some transformers, but it's just going to add some time to when they could get assembled. Got the IEC connector with the fuse built into it, and then like I was showing on the front, it's going to have this Angel Eye power switch, which like I do on all of mine, it's going to have filtered DC going to it. The other thing that I'm going to try to tune on this switch, I know this sounds kind of silly, but I want to make this switch where it's got the capacitor sized so that when you turn off the amp, this little light will stay glowing orange until it's safe to turn the amp back on. And it might be, I need to think about like how long and do some measurements on the bleeder resistors and how long it takes it to pull down the voltage on the rectifier tube so you don't have any chance of arcing the rectifier. It'll be kind of a safety thing that if you see this still glowing, don't turn it back on until that light's out, and then it's safe to turn it back on again so that we don't end up killing rectifier tubes. A couple other things on my personal amps, I've top mounted the cathode resistors to keep the heat out of the inside of the chassis, because that's what kills capacitors and other components is, the inside of the amp getting hot. And so I don't really feel that that's safe to do on a production amp, because there is like 30 volts DC up here on the top of the amp. It's probably not enough to electrocute somebody, but a little kid could walk over and they shouldn't be around tubes anyway, but if somebody touches that, they could get a little shock. So thought it was best to put the cathode resistors inside the amp. And so to let the heat out, I'm going to put some of these little 1-inch screens. And at first I wasn't sure about that, because I have some of these that are some new old stock ones that I bought off eBay. I thought, man, I don't want to put something like this on here where I may not be able to get any more of them, or I'm trying to avoid like kind of one-off esoteric kind of stuff that isn't being produced anymore. But I found a website that actually sells these new, and they have them both with aluminum like this, and then they also have with black on the ring on the outside. And I want to see, I think the black ones will look good, and then just have the screen silver. And I could always spray paint the screen's black too, so it all matches. So anyway, I think having these little screens here and then some vent holes, it's going to have a bottom plate on it, put some vent holes across the front on the underside so the heat kind of comes through and comes out the top, will help keep the insides nice and cool, and I don't have to worry about the cathode resistors being inside. And I'm also going to oversize those a lot so that we don't have a problem. And I realize that oversizing those resistors doesn't make less heat, because you're going to be dissipating the, like 2.5 watts, the two resistors will be, putting out heat. But having them oversized does make them last a long time, and you don't have to worry about that causing a problem or them drifting or anything like that. So I like the layout here with the tubes all kind of equidistant from each other. I tried to have a nice gap between these. Also, I have the tube envelopes, 2 envelope diameters apart from each other. And I also have the plates aimed like in this direction, so they're not pointed at each other, because that's important so you don't overheat the output tubes. And I think I'm going to be able to attach the tag strips to the tube socket mounting holes, and then maybe the holes for some of the transformers and stuff, so there's not going to be any visible screws on the top of the amp, which will give it a nice clean look. And I know some of you folks commented that an amplifier like this is not only going to be listened to, but it's going to be seen, because it's going to be in the living room, and it's going to be kind of a showpiece in your stereo cabinet or whatever. And I'm just not going to spend a lot of money and resources on like having some fancy CNC machined aluminum thing with a wooden case and all that fancy stuff. I'm kind of picked the motto of my company brand to be no BS audio, which means that you get just the sound and everything is function over form. And that's why, even though I know it's not popular, I'm putting the RCA jacks in the side, because I know that's going to make the amp quieter. And I know some of you folks are going to be using super high efficiency speakers, and so I don't want to have problems with people, returning them or saying, oh, this thing's noisy, I can't deal with it, or that kind of thing. Now, I guess the other option, if somebody was really concerned about that, I could put the input jacks up here on the top, or I could put them in the side. And that's one of the cool things about, making these, at least the first batch of them or so, making them to order, is that they'll be customizable with options like that. So, if you want them up here in the front, or you want them on the top, or you want them up closer to the front on the side, so it's a shorter signal path to the input tube, that's ideal. I put them back here as kind of a compromise, and I'll show you why I put them back here too. For you guys that don't have a preamp, you can get one of these little shit audio boxes. It's got a volume control. It's got this button here to switch between two inputs. Most people have like a turntable and a DAC, or a DAC and a CD player. Most people don't have more than two input devices. And me personally, I just switch the cables. But if you really were wanting some kind of a switchable little box, these little things are $60. And you can run some super short little RCA cables from here back to the side. You can see there's plenty of room here. And I think even some of their other preamps would fit in this space. They're not a whole lot deeper. And so it gives you that option of doing it this way. If you do want a volume control integrated into the amplifier, it's probably going to be about the same price as an optional extra as this little shit SYS box cost. And so, kind of 6 of one, half does the other. If you want the look of having the knob on the amp, we can do that. But like I said, then I got to wire up the volume control, and I have to, obviously buy the volume control, the knob. And so it's going to be about the same $60 price that this little box would be. So I think that kind of covers the input stuff. Definitely going to go with a 12X7 tube. I know some of you folks were hoping that we could use like a 12AT7 or some other tube that might be more advantageous for buying dual stock tubes. But the problem with that is this amp design runs pretty high voltage on the plates of these output tubes, and it takes a lot more voltage to swing these than it does on something that's running the plates at 250 or 300 volts, which AT7 could easily drive. I'm not sure how easily in 12AT7 would be able to drive the 60 volts peak to peak that these tubes are going to need to make full power, especially if the source isn't really strong. And I know everybody doesn't have a preamp, and I don't want to get in a situation where somebody's got like a little passive preamp where they're trying to feed the DAC directly to the amp and it doesn't have enough drive, and then it's like, well, I've designed it around the 12AT7 because a few people wanted that. So I guess in the future I could show mod videos on how to rebias this tube socket to run a 12AT7 if you wanted to, and then deal with it with a preamp to get the gain up where it needs to be, sort of a thing. Or again, I'm trying to make this thing DIY friendly. Obviously, I hope y'all understand, if you buy one of these assembled and you go inside it and you start swapping parts around, then any kind of warranty's done. And I still haven't decided on how long a warranty to give them. Obviously, when you give something like a lifetime warranty or a 5-year warranty, you just have to jack up the price to cover the potential problems and shipping back and forth and all that kind of stuff. And I want to try to keep these at a price point that, I'm not going to try to compete with the cheap China stuff, but I also don't want it to be in the $5,000-$6,000 range either. And so, I have to think through that. I haven't decided on that yet. And then the last thing is, if I do end up getting a fab shop to make chassis and they're like laser cutting them and they come to me all powder coated and ready to go, I'm probably going to offer some sort of a kit. And I'm not sure what that's going to look like, whether it's going to be, more than likely it's not going to come with any iron to keep the shipping costs low. And I'll say, yeah, here, just go buy this iron. And then you can paint the iron or do whatever you want. Or if you want to use Musical Power Supply, or you want to use EDCOR, or you want to use some other brand. But the chassis is going to come drilled for this iron layout. So if you want to use, something else that doesn't fit in these bolt holes, you'll have to deal with that yourself. But this is a pretty common end bell layout because Musical Power Supply said they can use these same end bells that EDCOR's using. So there's at least two sources for that. And then I'm going to work with Thermionic Labs for you folks overseas that want to build these, that you can get iron from them, and hopefully it'll be the same or similar bolt pattern. Probably for you folks overseas, you're going to end up just building these as a DIY thing anyway, because I have to think about shipping overseas and dealing with, customs and all that stuff. That opens up a whole other can of worms. But this whole kit thing, it's going to be further down the road. And I just got to think that through. And like I said, it's going to have to be at the point where I'm selling enough of these to go get like 20 or 30 chassis fabricated. I would then have some extra prefab chassis that could easily then be put together as kits and sold that way. And finally, I want to make it very clear that this is going to be an open source project, that the schematic's going to be available, going to do build videos on it, all that kind of stuff where, everybody can just build this thing and you don't have to pay me any money for plans or anything. If you want to make a donation to my site after you're done with it and it sounds awesome and you're like, thanks for helping me out or thanks for giving that to us, I obviously appreciate that, but I'm not going to ask for anything on the front end or gate the BOM or the schematic behind a paywall, or that you got to be a Patreon supporter to see it or anything like that. I'm not doing that. I never have. I've never gated any of my videos behind a paywall, and I'm not going to start now. And I think just having that information out there, because God forbid I could get in a plane crash or something and end up getting killed, and if you got one of these and you don't have the schematic for it and something quits working, you're not going to have any way of fixing it, or it's going to be difficult. And somebody can always reverse engineer this stuff. So you can't really hide this, and none of this is new technology. I mean, this schematic that I'm using in this amp was inspired by some folks on DIY audio, especially Kegger, who's no longer with us, but he had some really cool, I feel like, innovative ideas that a lot of the folks on these forums didn't agree with him, and they, I don't think any of them even tried his stuff, and I did, and I know that he was a very smart guy, and his technique for getting good sound out of tube amps is something I've gravitated to, and it really helped me a lot. So, get a little shout out to Kegger, but obviously I've done some of my own little tweaks to it from there, and that's why I'm not claiming ownership of this schematic or this design or whatever you want to call it, and why I'm going to be sharing it with everybody. I'm just going to be putting it together and trying to sell a few of these things for you folks to have some cool stuff to listen to. And I guess that's kind of the final piece of this. Some people are probably kind of confused about, like, why are you doing this? And, why, what's this channel about? What do you know, what's this company you're starting? What's it all about? And it's just about sharing good sounding audio with other people. And some of this is the joy I get from learning. Some of it's the joy I get from, making something from a pile of parts into something cool looking like this. And, being able to sit down and lay this thing out, really think through, how's the best way to do that? And does this look good? And, you may not like the way this thing looks. I think it looks awesome. It's simple and clean, but it's got enough bling on it to be, where it doesn't look just cobbled up out of a cake pan, or a cigar box, or, I've seen amps built like that, so, or just laying out a breadboard on a table. It's definitely, hopefully, a step up from that. But anyway, it's about sharing this with you guys and just other people. And I guess the main reason I'm going to build some of these to sell is I know there's some people that just, I feel like I've got kind of a God-given gift on being able to work with my hands and being able to do this kind of fabrication work. And sometimes I take for granted that not everybody knows how to do this stuff or is comfortable working with hand tools and, doing stuff in metal. And so, I wanted to put something together so that different people can enjoy this as much as I have. And one comment that really struck home to me was somebody said, you need to be careful. Once you start doing this, it's going to turn into a job. And I always tell people something doesn't feel like a job unless you don't enjoy doing it. And I enjoy building this stuff. And I'm going to keep the production limited enough where, I hope it doesn't turn into a 2-year waiting list or like Deckware has. But if it does, it just does. I'm not going to, turn this into a production thing where I'm paying other people to build them. I think what people really want is to know that the amp that they're buying was handcrafted by me. And so I want to keep it that way. As far as the chassis work, I don't feel bad about, farming that out. But as far as putting the amps together, making all the solder connections, running the wiring, and then testing them when I'm done and all that, I want it to be special and something different than what you get from anyone else. They'll all be hand tested. I'm going to listen to every amp that I build, and I want to ensure to people that what they get is as nice as something that I would build for myself. So anyway, still got a lot of testing to do on this thing. I haven't even started to wire up the inside. I've got some cool, innovative ideas to try on the power supply that I thought of the other night that I'll share in a future video. And I think that's going to be really cool. And definitely got to play around with the operating points of this 12AX7. And I'm going to start with these 3.5K transformers, but I also want to see what these 5K ones sound like. And then once I figure that out, get some musical power supply ones, may even get some thermionic lab ones. Like I said, I might be able to work out some deal on the shipping if I'm just getting the output transformers. Getting all the iron from them was, the shipping was going to be more than I can buy the transformer and the choke here in the US for. And so I don't think that these two are going to make enough difference in the sound to be shipping them over from Greece. But on the output transformers, we'll see. I would like to keep everything made in the USA as much as possible, just from a supply chain standpoint. And I don't know where the world's going right now. You never know when there's going to be some kind of war breaking out or crazy stuff. And as much of the stuff as I can keep here, the better. So I hope this was an interesting video. If you're enjoying this content, please subscribe to the channel. Please like the video. That'll help you see updates about this as we go on the build. I am going to jump back on the R8 and do some transformer testing. I've got this. I've got some ISO iron and some other stuff to try with it to try to resolve that issue. I want to get the R300 completely done before I really dive back into this. And Had several comments about the 6P1 little amp. Haven't forgot about you guys. I've got parts and everything to do that build, but it's like squirrel, and yeah. I keep getting sidetracked, so I'm going to try to like discipline myself, get the R300 done, then work out the details on this thing, get parts ordered. I am building some of those EL34 clones too for the Patreon fans. I do gate, or try to gate, that behind Patreon to reward those folks that help support the channel in that way. But at least they get them first dibs on it. I think the last pair of them, one went to a Patreon guy and then the other one didn't sold. And so I sold it a few weeks later to another guy. So that's not written in stone. Anyway, again, thanks for all y'all's support. And we'll see you soon. Have a nice day.